In this video, we're going to set up and use variables, which are the way that we make your app intelligent.
This video will be a little more technical because variables are a very complete but powerful subject that will allow us to do a lot of things in Voltapp. We have already seen what were the nodes. As a reminder, they're the little Lego bricks that constitute our app. We also saw the graphs to create on a node of a logic and add new behaviors. We still have to see the last great basic concept of Voltapp, variables. Variables will allow communication between the different parts of our app. They will allow us to make the elements of the app dynamic. The interest of a variable is that if we change its value in one place, all the places where it is linked will be impacted too. It's very interesting in Voltapp to be able to change a lot of things automatically and dynamically by using variables in graphs or directly in nodes. We will see the different actions of variables later. To begin with, what is a variable? A variable is represented by three elements. Its name first. Its name is what will identify it in Voltapp. For example, in the app, we can have a variable app color or user list. Then it comes in its type, which defines the nature of the data which we can put in it. Then comes its type, which defines the nature of the data that we can put in it. For example, a variable of type color to put a color or a type of text, a type of number, or variables of a type a little more complex, like user lists, for example, which will also have several sub-data. We'll come back to this a little bit later. The last element we have in the variables is its value, which corresponds to what the variable is worth at a given time. For example, if a variable number of items in the cart when creating an e-commerce site, if we have 3 items in the cart, the value of that variable is 3, and its type is number. When adding a new item, its value will change to 4, and if we empty the cart, its value will change to 0. The interesting thing is that in all of these places where it is used, whether in the display or in calculations or in database queries, as soon as we change the value of this variable in one place in our application, it will be changed in all of the places where it is used. We'll illustrate this concept a little later. To begin with, I'm going to show you how to create variables. So as we saw earlier at the top, we have what we call the toolbar, and we'll look at the Variables tab. By clicking on it, you will see a window with all the variables. As you can see, there is a theme variable. This is a variable created by default on all projects to define the default values for the appearance of our app. It's very practical in Voltapp that we can change the values of a variable. For example, here we can see that there is a foreground variable that is linked by default to the color of foreground elements, such as icons, text, and so on. So if I change it to red, we will see that my text changes color. But if I add a second text here, we'll see that it takes the same color. Also, if I add an icon, it will be red by default. Another way to access my variables is in the right pane of the node's attribute, when they are linked to an attribute, like here, theme.foreground. If I click on it, I change it directly as to set it to black. So the color is applied to all attributes that are linked to my foreground variable. This was the default theme. Let's create another variable so that you can understand how it works. A new variable that we'll call number of clicks. So its type will be a number. We could also change its unit to better reflect its value, like a duration in seconds or degrees, for example. We can also set its default value at the launch of the app, but here we'll leave it at 0. Let's see how we can use this variable. We'll create a button. So here I have a button. I want to create the following behavior. The button will increase my variable by +1, and the value will be displayed in the button name. Let's put in the text attribute of the button, count 0. I wanted to say count 1, count 2, count 3, and so on. Let's see something really interesting and remove what we don't need. I'm just going to make sure that I change the layout attribute of my section node so that it takes up 100% of the screen and that the content of that section is centered. If I delete my icon, my variable is deleted too. Why? Because my variable was linked to my icon node. Fortunately, I can undo this by using Ctrl-Z. This allows me to introduce a rather interesting concept about variables, the concept of scope. The variable here is on icon, but if I go to the section, for example, there's the variable theme. If I go to the app node, there's theme, but also number. This is simply because the variables exist in the nodes and all of their children. But a variable created on icon is not going to be accessible in the parent nodes. If I create a variable in section, it will be visible in the button and icon node, but not in app. If you want a variable to be accessible in nodes, either you have to create it on the node or on one of the node's parents. So a simple solution might be to create all of the variables on app. For example, if I take the variable and drag it to app and go back to variables, you can see that it appears in app as a theme. So now it's accessible by absolutely every node. But creating all the variables in an app will be more and more complicated, and it will not be as easy for you to find them. Variables is useful just on a specific node, you might as well only create it on that node. Now I'm going to show you how to use that variable. I want to associate my number variable with my text. Just click on the link icon on the right of the text attribute to link the number of clicks variable. This is what we call assign, a variable. So the name of the button, as you can see, is replaced by the value of the variable, which by default is 0. And you can see in the right-hand panel, called the inspector, there are several attributes that are in blue. They are linked to variables, which make them dynamic. This is the case for the theme variable, which is already assigned by default to many attributes. Now if I click on my variable from the attribute and change the default value, it will directly change the display on the screen. Let's try it. We can put 2, 3, 4, so forth. If I want to assign my variables to a text, I have to check that it is on one of the parents of the node. But the variable is only on the button, so I have to drag it on to section. And now we see that by going to the text attribute of the text node, I can assign the variable to it, which displays the number of clicks on the text on the screen as well. I can also change its value via the assigned attribute. The change is simultaneous. Now I want this change in the number of clicks to be done by the behavior of the app user when he clicks on the button. So let's go to the graph mode of the button node. Let's right-click and then add a block. Let's choose a triggering event, here the click. I double-click and the block appears. I extend its output arrow to choose the variable block set number of clicks. The block appears and we see that the variable has a value of 0. I can change it to 1. But here I want to increment it with each click. To do this, I'm going to extend the entry point to connect an expression block called add. Let's define what we're adding. We can assign the number of clicks variable to A here and then select 1. Each time we click, it will take the previous value of the number of clicks, add 1, then define the new value. Let's try our logic by running the preview. We click, and we see that the clicks increase. Variables can be assigned to many attributes, but they have a type, which is sometimes compatible, like number to text. But if it is a non-compatible variable, like list, it won't be proposed during the assignment. If I try to assign a variable to the attribute deactivate, we see that no Boolean variable, i.e. with the value true or false, is available on this node or on its parents. There is the number of clicks on the button, but the number is not compatible in Boolean. The same goes for the decoration attribute. On the other hand, the attribute size of the layout is a number. All variables of type number will be proposed. If I assign the variable number of clicks and I click on the preview, the more I click on the button, the more the text size of the button increases too. Let's remove the assignment and go back to a normal text size. As it can be complicated to know all of the types of variables, it is possible to convert an attribute directly into a variable of its type. For example, the background of the button is linked to the theme variable, which is shared by several other nodes. Changing the theme variable directly is not a good idea because this change would impact all of the nodes. I'll click on the link icon on the right of the attribute and disconnect the theme variable. Then I click on it again, and since it's a color attribute, if I click on Convert to Variable, the background variable of type color will be created, which you can see by clicking on it. If I want to change it according to the number of clicks, I return to the graph. I pull the arrow of the flow after the variable block to use a control block. We could then use the switch text block, which is a single orientation changing the text depending on several conditions. We could use the switch text block, which is a single orientation changing the text depending on several conditions. But let's keep it simple with the condition blocks. Let's extend the entry point of the verified or unverified test of the condition to choose the expression smaller than. Let's say that if it is true that a number of clicks is smaller than 3, then we define that the background variable becomes blue, a little lighter blue. If it's false, let's define that if the number of clicks is smaller than 5, the background variable becomes green. Finally, if it's wrong again, let's define that if the number of clicks is smaller than 8, so larger than the background variable, it now becomes yellow. And if it's not smaller, so it's bigger than 8, then the variable will be red. From now on, the color will change according to the increments of the number of clicks. Our logic has become more complex. Let's try to arrange our graph visually to better understand it. Don't forget, saving is important. Let's click on Preview, and we can see that our code works. This is how we use a variable from the graph, by creating it from an attribute. Now let's look at another important element of a variable, its observation. When a variable changes, we may want to change something else, but often on another node. Let's add a text node and change its text to write, "The score is not yet reached." I want to code the following logic. If I exceed 10, then the text will say, "The score is reached, congratulations." But on the graph of my text node, if I create an event block, I don't have the number of clicks variable because it is not in the text node or one of its parents. So I have to move my number of clicks variable to the section node again. Let's visually add a condition via the condition and expression block. If my variable, which now appears, is greater than 10, then I'd like to change the text message. This one must be dynamic and therefore converted into a variable. For that, let's go back to the attribute and convert it into a variable, automatically named value. Then let's move this variable, which is an app, and put it in only the text node. This can be seen in the variable menu. Let's rename this variable to score message to be clear. Let's go back to the graph of the text node. If it is true that the number of clicks is greater than 10, then I define the message score as score reached, bravo. And then we save. The graph is representing my logic well, but something is still missing. So if we run the preview, we can see that actually it doesn't work. I do not want to check my condition at the appearance of the text, since it appears only at the launch of the app. But that's when the number of clicks changes. If I make a mistake and create a watch block score message and delete the event and launch the preview, it will not work. You always have to think carefully about which variable you want to observe. Here I need to create number of clicks, and the preview now shows that our logic is working. This watch block is particularly useful on the video or screen node, for example, to know on which current screen we are and to change the content. Finally, let's explore two specific types of variables, object and list. Let's start with object. You've already seen this because it's the type of theme of variable. Object allows you to collect a name and several variables inside. Theme groups the variable text with a font and color variables like background and so on. Let's create another object, like a user profile. Let's create several variables to see how useful the variable can be. A text variable, username, a user email, a user is logged in, and so on. And that's a lot of variables, so let's delete some of them. Let's create instead one single object variable, user, with all of these fields. Let's edit the type by adding our 4 fields: name and text, email and text, age and number, and connected in Boolean. There is a default value that we can edit. Let's say that the user is connected by default, that he is 29 years old, and that he has a name and an email. Let's use this variable, for example, to say that if we are logged in, we can have the option to log out via this button. If we switch to the text node and want to assign the text of the object variable user.name, we see that it appears. If we assign it, the default user name appears. Let's do the same with a second text and assign the email field of the user variable. Now let's go to the button and assign the attribute user.connected. As this field is true by default, the button is disabled. If I click on the object variable and do previous, I see all of the values. By changing the default values, they directly impact what we see. For the list type, it's almost the same type of object. Let's create a list variable and add the text type. I can add article titles. I can reorder them. Let's rename this list to article to be clearer. I can also directly change the type of all of the items in the list, like from text objects, which I can customize with a title and content. A list of items can then be displayed entirely or only one of the items. Let's display the title of the first article. For the moment, I can't assign the value of the first text to my list. Let's create a new variable, first article, By going into graph mode, I indicate that when my text appears, I will define my first article by deducting it from my list variable. To do this, we can use the expression block retrieve to retrieve an item from a list to which I have assigned my variable items. But as the list acts as an object with several fields, and I only want to retrieve the title, I have to extend the output of retrieve item from a list to create another block called destructure an object. We see the 2 fields appear, title and content. I can link the title output point to the input point of the define first item block. By clicking on preview, I see that the default value of this list item appears on my text node. By indicating the index this time, I can display another item. As the index order starts with 0, if I put 1, then I have the second item in the list that appears. New item. This is how you use variables in general, whatever their type may be: text, number, Boolean, object, or list.
Thanks for watching this video. I'll see you soon in another adventure with the no-code community here at Voltapp.